With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move. It is your duty to plant yourself like a tree. Look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Good evening, all, and welcome to Tactics here on News Radio 1440 on the Facebook page, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Twitch, on Periscope. However you want to watch us, we're pretty much on all of the platforms, so you have no excuse for missing any episodes of the show right here on Tactics, where speech isn't violence, tolerance isn't love, and disagreement isn't hate. Thank you so much for joining us on the program this evening. And before we get off into anything else, and I do apologize for not being able to be on yesterday and being a little bit late today. We've been having some technical issues over here at the studio, and I am sorry about that, but hopefully we've got everything up and running to where I won't be dropping in and out, and hopefully everything's fixed now. So, by the way, if I am having any problems with that, or you're noticing any technical issues on your side, please be sure to let us know at Tactics Radio on my Twitter feed, or you can comment on any of my videos or email me. All of those would be fine. Hopefully everything is back up and running again. But since we missed yesterday, we've got an awful lot of news to cover. And one of the big ones that I want to start out with, and I do want to start out on a somber but positive note. I got to give props to the University of Alabama. Now, all of you know, I'm an Auburn guy. Always have been. My father was an Auburn grad. I'm an Auburn grad. We're a very Auburn family. But events like this remind us that there are things so much bigger than sports. And this is really where sports is at its best, where it brings people together and reminds us of the inherent good inside of us. And because sports has the ability, the propensity to bring people together in ways that other things do not, I think that it becomes a very good venue for that. And what I am talking about, of course, is what happened over the weekend with the Tuscaloosa police officer. He was killed in the line of duty back on September the 17th. Guy's name was Donald Cuset. And of course, it's always tragic when a police officer loses his life in the line of duty, protecting other people. And we do thank all of our armed forces, all of our police officers, all of our first responders for what they do for us. And we certainly do honor that occasionally, because they do have a dangerous job, not everybody makes it home. And many times the reason that they don't make it home is because they were doing their job and protecting somebody else. And so we certainly do salute Officer Cuset. And the University of Alabama decided they wanted to salute him too. And so they had several different ways to show their honor, to show that they care about him and his family and the community of Tuscaloosa that lost one of its finest this past week. So Bryant-Denny was lit up blue to pay homage to his sacrifice, and that was done in the lead up to this weekend's game. And also, before the game started, they held a moment of silence. I believe it was either right before or right after the national anthem. And so they had a moment of silence in his honor. That was a really cool thing. And really do just tip the hat to the University of Alabama, even coming from this Auburn guy, as to the way that they honored him. And this was, I thought, the coolest thing. And it shows that there are really great people just all across this state. The entire student section wore blue. Now, it's difficult enough, and I know because I've been part of this. I've been part of the planning. I've been part of the people that actually look and see how successful it was. I have been part of campaigns to try to get students to wear one color or the other, or to wear a certain thing. It's not easy. And it's not that the students aren't willing to participate. Sometimes they just forget, or they walk out of the house and have the shirt that you want, or the color that you want them to wear is not clean or something like that. That happens. And because of that, through no malicious intent whatsoever, just people being forgetful or not having the right color shirt or whatever, they walk out not wearing the right thing. This is a common thing at student events. Now, usually the student section is a little bit better about it than the alumni fans. But like Auburn has tried to stripe the stadium before, and that's very difficult because you're trying to get people to dress based on what section they happen to be sitting in. So that's also quite a challenge. It sometimes works okay, but when it does, it's kind of a rare event for it to work out the way that they want it to. But the University of Alabama student section wore a color that was not one of their team colors. It's not like they were doing a white out or a crimson out, or if you were Auburn, a navy or an orange out, because those things happen. But this is not even their school colors, and the student section thought it was important enough to make it a point and remember to wear blue, even though that's a color that they would not normally wear to an Alabama football game. And I thought it just showed an amazing amount of class, and I certainly do applaud the student section for doing that. I love my state. I really love my state. And Lord knows I gripe about it from time to time. I talk about the weather, which, let's be honest, is way too hot, and it's way too hot pretty much year round. I would love to have a milder climate living somewhere with. I wish I could live in Alabama with the climate of, like, I don't know, Kentucky or Nebraska maybe. That would be ideal, something more akin to that. But the thing is, I love my state, and this puts on display why. It's the people. I love the people of the state of Alabama. And even though I complain about them, even though I have my misgivings about Alabama's government and I have some issues with our state and our culture, it's the best place in America to live, I'm convinced. And a big part of the reason is stuff like this. That's what it boils down to. This is a great moment, and I love to see good people around our state just showing a little love and support to people that they know are in pain, that they know are hurting, and going out of their way. I mean, is it a huge deal? Is it going to be something that changes the world? No, not necessarily. But it's just Southern hospitality and showing that we do care about one another. And that's what I love. And I'm sure, even though I haven't seen any reporting on this, because I know how the people of Alabama are, just like we had the fallen officer in the Auburn community a few weeks, I guess that would have been a few months ago now. But just like we had a fallen officer at Auburn, you're going to see people raising money to help this guy out, to help his family out. And I would bet my bottom dollar that you're going to see exactly the same thing happen here in the community of Tuscaloosa. So good on you, Alabama. Keep up the good work. And I'm not talking about the football. I'd rather you not do so well on that. But the community stuff, by all means, keep that up. It just does go to show that the people of Alabama and the kind of heart that they have. And I'm really glad that that gets to be put on display when something like this happens. I hate that it happened under these circumstances, of course. But I love to see that when something horrible like this happens, the people of Alabama can come together. All right. One other thing that I have to talk about, and ironically enough, this one has to do with Auburn. So Auburn and Alabama both in the news, but this one has nothing to do with football. This one's actually closer to Auburn's basketball program because it involves Prince Charles. Charles Barkley, of course. Charles Barkley is very Trump-esque in a lot of ways. Not necessarily in his politics, but the thing that I've said about Donald Trump, I don't know how many times, is Donald Trump just says crap all day long. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it you like, some of it you don't, some of it drives you crazy, but the point is he's talking basically 24 hours a day. And that's part of the reason that people have an insane level of awareness of the 24-hour news cycle now, is because, I don't know, about 3 or 4 times a day, Donald Trump changes the news cycle in real time, which I imagine has got to be something that's entertaining to him personally. That he can be watching if he has CNN or MSNBC, or, I mean, probably Fox News would be a little bit later because they'd be reacting to CNN or MSNBC and what they said about it, but Trump can literally just tweet and then watch in real time the news media freak out over his tweet. I would love to have that kind of power and influence, just because I'd love to get the reactions to things that I say, to get that kind of critique in real time, and that must be a fascinating way to live. I don't necessarily like what Donald Trump tweets all the time, like I just said, but you have to imagine that he's just sitting there watching this and then tweeting out and laughing at the reactions, at least from time to time. And I think Barkley kind of does a similar thing. He doesn't have quite that level of power and influence because the man's not president of the United States. He's a basketball commentator for TNT. But the point is, Barkley is very Trump-esque in the sense that he just says a whole bunch of stuff. And you're going to like some of it and you're going to not like some of it, because anybody that talks that much, you're going to occasionally have some things that you agree with, some things that you occasionally don't, but the man just talks a lot. And so in Barkley's case, this is what he said, which I thought was really interesting. He went on this interview with CNN with Michael Smerconish and went on his show. And what he was discussing was the campaign of Doug Jones. Of course, Doug Jones running for office again. And we're going to be seeing the Republican primaries coming up in, I believe, June. So we've got a long time until the primaries are even there. And we've got even further until the general election. But Charles Barkley goes on CNN, and this is what he said. I said, Doug, I'm going to support you. I'm going to try to get every black person in Alabama to vote for you, and it worked out. So this is sort of rehashing a conversation that he had before, and by the way, we've had this quote before. This is not Charles giving us something new. But one of the reasons that I brought this up is this is proof positive that, at least for me personally, you can really like somebody personally and not agree with their politics, because very few people in Alabama's news sphere have been more critical of Doug Jones than I have. I mean, occasionally he does some things that I think are at least somewhat right, and I try to give him credit for that. But Doug Jones and we're not on the same page very often, and if you want to get the details on that, I have literally hours and hours of video footage of me explaining why he and I do not see eye to eye. But if you want to watch that, by all means, go to my YouTube channel at Tactics Radio, and you'll be able to find that whole thing. But nonetheless, just looking at Charles being a big Doug Jones supporter, trying to get as many votes for him and pounding the pavement for him as much as he can, I still like Barkley. Can't disagree with him more on Doug Jones, but I still like Barkley. He's an entertaining human being. The reason he's on TNT is because he's a very entertaining human. And the stuff that they start back and forth with one another, one of the most entertaining things that I've done in the past year was watching Barkley cover the Final Four with Auburn and their run making it to the Sweet 16. And the other guys, they all have teams that they like, teams that they played for in college like Barkley. But Barkley just is so insane and over the top with it. He had the big stuffed tiger and the orange and blue streamers and balloons. Barkley's an entertaining guy, and you don't have to agree with somebody's politics to find them entertaining or like them. I think a great example of that was actually what happened over the weekend with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, 168 years young, she goes on the news, and they were doing an interview with her because, of course, you remember a couple weeks ago, they were all up in arms and saying that Brett Kavanaugh, there were new allegations, which turned out to be absolutely nothing. Even the victim said she didn't remember the events in question. The, victim, wow, smack my mic there like I'm an intern on his first day. The victim, in air fingers quotes there, just because the victim doesn't even claim that happened to them, says they can't recall the event. But anyway, without rehashing and reliving that whole story, there were people interviewing Ruth Bader Ginsburg about the media circus kind of surrounding that. And Ginsburg is next to as left as you can get. I think Sotomayor is slightly more left than her. But when it comes to her judicial philosophy, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is about as far from the right as you can get. And I don't think that Kavanaugh is quite there, but he's definitely right of center. So this is somebody that would be on the opposite side of the court than she would be. We all understand that if you paid any attention to the courts at all. And a lot of these leftists that adore Ruth Bader Ginsburg and absolutely love her have made her into, weirdly enough, a pop culture icon, which is weird considering she's a justice, but nonetheless, they've kind of done that. These same leftists that were doing this were the ones that were saying that Kavanaugh is a rapist and he ought to be impeached immediately. There were people trying to move forward with impeachment proceedings on Brett Kavanaugh as a Supreme Court justice, saying that this undermined his whole legitimacy as a judge, even though there wound up being nothing to it. And they asked for Ruth Bader Ginsburg's comments on it, and she said, he's a good and decent man. And this should not surprise anybody. As much as I dislike Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I absolutely abhor her legal philosophy on a number of levels, I think she's a good judge of character. I really do. And the reason that I say that is she is at least reasonable enough to put aside her disagreements with somebody and look at the person themselves, which is a good quality in a judge. I don't think that Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a good judge for other reasons. But the point is, she can put any of her personal disagreements with them on an issue aside and look at the person and whether or not they're a good person or not. And she's been able to do that with Kavanaugh despite the media circus that's gone on. And remember that her best friend up until his death was the late Antonin Scalia. And that to me is a beautiful paramount of people that don't agree with one another on politics, but can still respect one another and even be friends. I think that that's an example for all of us to follow. And I don't think that you should follow Ruth Bader Ginsburg's legal philosophy. But as far as her take on being able to look at people and to be able to separate out her personal disagreements with them to actually measure whether or not they're a good person or not, that's a quality I think this country needs a huge dose of. I think that if a lot more of us were like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, at least in that one specific way, the country would actually be a much better place. And I could say the same thing about Antonin Scalia if he were around today. Being able to look past that and being able to look at the person and trying to observe their intent and whether or not they have a good heart. I'm not saying that's the be-all, end-all. But that would do an awful lot to diffuse this outrage culture that we have in our country today. And that's not all Charles Barkley said in this interview. Now, he said something else that I think was incredibly profound on CNN. He said, and this is in quotes, I said, talking about himself, I said, we need to start holding you Democrats accountable because they've been taking black people's votes. And they only talk to black people every 4 years. All of these politicians only talk to black people every 4 years because they want their vote. Barkley is 100% right on that. I couldn't have put it more succinctly if I wanted it to. And if you don't believe me, look at the Democrat field right now. Even the candidates that are themselves black, like Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, they are not even talking to black people right now. Why? Because look at who the first two primary states are. Iowa, New Hampshire. Both supremely white states. Not a big black contingency there. And because of that, so far, very few of them have said anything that is talking to black people about issues that seem to be of great concern to them. In fact, and I'll get to this in a second, when you're talking about social issues, they're talking about things that alienate black voters. They're talking about things that black voters find to be abhorrent. But they're still talking about them and going even further left because they believe that that is what is going to win them the primary in Iowa and New Hampshire. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm certain that every single one of those candidates has a strategy to reach out to black voters, but they're not going to implement it until you start getting into the South. You start getting into South Carolina, even our home state of Alabama. You start getting into some of those Super Tuesday states, Then they're going to start bringing out the big guns when it comes to talking to black voters. But until then, no. And it's because they're not so much worried about them as they're worried about their votes. When that happens, I guarantee you can look at the timeline, mark it down on your calendar right now. As soon as the New Hampshire primary is done, what you're going to see is, if not all, most of the candidates come out and start talking about voter suppression. They're going to come out, they're going to hit hard on voter suppression and talk about how people are trying to silence black people's votes. Now, there's not a lick of truth to it, but that is going to be the topic that they come out with. Again, mark my words, put it down on the calendar, watch it happen. As soon as the New Hampshire primaries are gone, I guarantee you the next day, you're going to see at least one candidate talk about it, and more candidates are going to follow between then and the next big primary that comes after New Hampshire. Because they're going to try to start building those votes. Because Barkley is 100% right. They're primarily concerned with the votes, not the people or the issues themselves. But this is the advice that I would give to all black voters. And by the way, this applies to other voting blocks. I'm just specifically talking about it in reaction to what Barkley said. Your vote only matters when people do not know where it is going. Because when the candidate knows where it's going, now granted, they may care about it a little bit more in a primary because they know that the Republican or the Democrat primary is going to be broken up into smaller, more distinct voting blocks. But when it comes right down to it, in a general election, they do not care about your vote unless they are worried it might go a different direction. And this is not just true of black voters. I say this as a white evangelical Christian. The white evangelical Christian vote has not mattered in a very long time. And the reason that it hasn't is because they know you're going to vote Republican. Even if they put up a heathen like Donald Trump. And I know that that makes some people mad, but it's the truth. You put up somebody that has slept with hundreds, if not thousands of women. Thousands is exaggerating a bit, I know. But I mean, that's the way that Donald Trump talks about. You go up with somebody like that, doesn't matter if they put somebody like that up there, as long as they know that at the end of the day, you're going to look at them and then you're going to look at the Democrat and say, okay, I don't care that this guy lives like a pagan. I'm voting for him. The only way that that matters is if there is at least a chance that you either vote for the other guy or don't vote at all. Or vote third party. Either of those. If they're concerned that your vote may not go to them, that's the only time that your vote actually matters. Because did what the evangelical Christians want, did that matter in the last election? No. Granted, they put up Mike Pence as kind of a throwing you a bone kind of thing. And that's no slam against Mike Pence. I mean, I really like Mike Pence. Would much rather him be president than President Trump right now. But my point is, the white evangelical vote, what they wanted didn't matter because they knew for a fact that if it was the choice between literally anybody that wasn't an insane socialist and Hillary Clinton, you were going to pick literally anybody. And the same is true for the Democrats. The reason Democrats don't care much about black people's votes is because they know when it comes down to them and a Republican, it doesn't matter if they nominate a guy that was a former Klansman, which, by the way, has happened multiple times in the Democrat Party. You're still going to vote for the Democrat. They know it. And that's why they don't care about your issues. That's why they don't listen to you. Barkley is right. And if you want to know why, that's why. They're not worried about your vote. They're not worried about it going to the Republicans. They're not worried about it going third party, and they know that reliably 95% of black people are going to vote for them no matter what they do. So why would they waste their time worrying about what you think about them? They don't care what you think. They care how you vote. That's all the politicians are worried about. And it's true for several different voting blocks. Like I said, it's true of a couple of the voting blocks that I belong in. And it's going to be the way that they continue to operate until you give them a reason to believe that your vote might go somewhere else. Be that a third party or not voting at all or voting for the other party. But as long as they know that you're safe in their voting blocks, they're not going to worry about what you think. And never will. You know, I think it's really astounding that this is the case because I have really good friends in the community, in the church, that happen to be black. And you know what I find astounding about that? Even the ones that vote Democrat consistently, they actually agree socially with the people on the right far more than they do the left. The vast majority of black people, and by the way, public opinion polls back this up. This isn't just me giving anecdotal evidence, even though this experience also coincides with the data that I have. By and large, black people, at least from a social level, not necessarily financial, they much more resonate with people on the right than people on the left. Most black people are against abortion. Most black people do not like the idea of the government honoring and licensing homosexual marriage. When it comes to these social issues, be it the trans movement or the environmentalism movement, all of that other stuff, by and large, they side with the right. The only reason that they tend to not vote with the right is A, they've been trained for generations and been told that everybody on the right is racist. Which is amazing that the party of the Klan and Jim Crow have convinced black people that the other party are the ones that are racist. That just blows my mind, and I'll never understand that. Especially when you consider that the two goals that the Republican Party had at its inception, at its onset, was the abolishment of slavery and the abolishment of polygamy. And that was it. Those were the two goals of the Republican Party. And it was also Republicans that got rid of Jim Crow. It was Republicans that elected Abraham Lincoln that it got rid of slavery. Despite all of that, somehow the Democrats have still convinced a vast majority of black people that everyone on the right is racist. You may not agree with their policies, but the idea that roughly half the country is racist is absurd. And when it all boils down to when it all comes down to that, that's one of the main reasons that they will not vote Republican. But another one is because by and large they have a difference in their idea on when it comes to financial institutions, financial policy. That seems to be a pretty big sticking point. In fact, you'll hear this myth about the big switch. Didn't happen. Because when the switch was supposed to happen was around the era of Nixon. Supposed to have happened in the 70s. But the problem is, it doesn't match up with what we know historically. Black people started moving away from the Republicans and their votes roughly around the 1930s and 40s. FDR had far more to do with black people starting to vote for Democrats than any other president. Way more than Nixon. Nixon had something to do with white people in the South starting to vote Republican. But the black vote had shifted decades before that. And so when you look at these historic trends, you understand, and you have a much better gauge of what actually happened and the reason that what Barkley is talking about Democrats only wanting to talk to black people every 4 years and not really caring what they think. Once you understand all of this backstory, once you understand all of this context, it becomes a lot more clear why that is. And this would be my advice to everybody. Everybody. Doesn't matter if you're black, white, Hispanic, Asian, don't care. No matter who you are, vote based on your values. Not your skin tone, not your demographics. Because if we all just did that, if we all just voted based on our own values and our own principles, and didn't necessarily get caught up on the party label and didn't get caught up in the way that we're supposed to vote, I guarantee you there would be changes in this country. And that's not just coming from black folks. I'm talking about Hispanic people. I'm talking about, like I said, white evangelicals who we always know which way they're going to vote. If that happened, you would start seeing significant changes for the better in this country. All right, one last local story that I've got for today, and it does have to do with the city of Birmingham, of course, Alabama's largest city. There was a climate change march that took place in one of Birmingham's local parks with 300 people. I know those numbers kind of boggle the mind. Most children can't even count to 300. I've never even counted to 300. It really astounds me that there were 300 people that got out for that climate march. I love the fact that the media and the way that they covered that, they talked about it like 300 was something to be really impressed about. Oh, 300 people showed up. Look, the crowd size, I'm not going to get into all of that. I just think that it's hilarious that they're making such a big deal about it. It's the same thing. I don't want to fight with anybody or dispute what the crowd size was. There probably were actually 300 people there. But I do find it really funny that they're treating it like that's a big achievement. Birmingham is a city of 210,000 people. 300 is nothing to write home about, especially when you consider that they didn't exactly have a whole lot else to compete with. In fact, to my knowledge, this was the only protest, the only climate change protest in the entire state. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that. There might have been one in Mobile that I didn't hear about, something like that. But to my knowledge, this was the only one in the state, and so it didn't exactly have a lot of competition. In other words, if you're a climate change person, you had to go to Birmingham to protest. So you were gathering people from a very large area, much larger than Birmingham proper, which has 210,000. So the pool's actually larger than that, and you still only drew 300? And that gets even less impressive when you consider that of these 300, a large plurality of these people were kids that were getting out of school to do this. I'm a public school teacher's child. I was even a public school teacher myself for a brief stint of time. And of course, I went to public high school where my dad taught. I can tell you from personal experience, if you have a choice between going to class and pretty much anything else, it doesn't matter if you even agree with it, you take getting out of class. I'll be honest with you, I was not nearly as strong in my beliefs as I was. Well, I say that my beliefs were somewhat different when I was in high school. I've always been stubborn. But I was not nearly as strong in my political beliefs now as I was back then. I'm not sure that I couldn't have been persuaded to miss class for this, to be perfectly honest. I don't know that I would have, but I'm not sure that I turned that offer down anyway. If I get the choice between going to a park or being in class, I know that even I, who was right-leaning even back in high school, I at least consider getting out of class for it. And so I don't find it terribly impressive that they were able to gather 300 people, many of them school children that got to play hooky, to do this. I just don't find that to be something worth writing home about. And this is one of the quotes from one of the kids that was organizing and running this thing. Quote, "I would rather be in school right now. I would rather be sitting at a desk doing math because that would mean the adults were taking care of our planet and we wouldn't have to." Oh, give me a break. I know better than that. You wouldn't rather be there. Like, I did school events. I got out of class for things. When I was in FFA, for example, I didn't get up and give speeches and say, you know what, I'd really rather be in class. Don't tell me that. It's so obvious that they're putting on a show here. And we'll get into some of the kids talking about global warming a little bit later in our Daily Dose of Stupid, so be sure to stay tuned for that. But it's so ridiculously ingenuous that they're trying to prop this number up as though it's something to be impressive. I guarantee you, give me any random event and let me tell kids that they can get out of school for it. Guarantee you I could get 300 people there. Not a problem. I could do it in Montgomery, which has an even smaller population than Birmingham. Guarantee you I could get 300 people gathered up for it. Would not be a difficult task at all. All right, so we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in just a minute.
And now for a reading from the Social Justice Warrior Bible.
with Pastor Gregory Post.
Welcome in. I'm Gregory Post, head pastor at the Eternal Living Word Trans-Denominational Community Church and Coffee House in Novato, California. Now it's time for a reading from the SJW Bible. Today's reading will come from Leviticus chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans, and after putting the fire in them, placed incense on it and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And the fire came out of the presence of the Lord, which created a wicked cool light show for them to see and totally got everyone feeling the Spirit's presence. Then Moses said to Aaron, "It is what the Lord spoke, saying, even though I didn't command you to use this strange fire, I totally understand your need to express yourselves in worship and keep yourselves entertained." So Aaron therefore danced and yelled with joy, knowing that his sons were having a good time at worship. Moses called out to Mishael and Ezaphan, and the son of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, and said to them, "Come forward, carry your relatives away in front of the sanctuary outside of the camp, for they have fainted from being overwhelmed by the power of God's coolness." So they came forward and carried them still in their tunics outside the camp, as Moses had said. Then Moses said to Aaron and his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not uncover your heads, nor tear your clothes, because God wants us to always be happy, and as long as we're happy, He's happy. Therefore, if worship doesn't give you an overwhelming sense of euphoria, you need to find another congregation, preferably one with a more dynamic pastor and band." So they did according to the word of Moses. And the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, "Do not drink wine or strong drink, neither you nor your sons with you, when you come into the sanctuary, so that you will be able to drink more once you arrive. It is a perpetual statute throughout your generations. And so as to make a distinction between the holy and the profane, between the unclean and the clean, because when worship stops being fun or feels judgy, then it becomes profane and unclean." Wow, so inspiring. This has been a reading from the SJW Bible. And remember, the only truth that matters is your truth.
And welcome back, all. We do have a few more things to discuss. One is, I need to put it in proper context, but it is breaking news about the whole situation between Joe Biden and Trump and the Ukraine. I won't go into full detail here because other people have done that probably to death at this point, and I also have my own episodes explaining the whole background between Joe Biden and the Ukraine. So I'm just going to give you a quick primer here, and then we'll jump into the latest breaking news. So essentially, the too long didn't read version of this story is that Joe Biden, while he was vice president, was negotiating with the president of the Ukraine and their government. And they were negotiating with, and there's a lot of evidence for this. Again, I cover all of that in some of my videos. I know that other people have done a great job on this. I know that Glenn Beck actually did an entire special on this subject, which I highly recommend. A lot of my information came from him, and I cited him in that. So when it comes to this, Joe Biden was talking to the Ukrainian president and held an awful lot of leverage and basically told him that they were going to withhold federal aid coming their way if there was not he was the general prosecutor, I think is their term for it in the Ukrainian government. If that guy didn't go away, and part of the reason that he was going away is because this guy was investigating a business deal that went down by the biggest natural gas producer in Ukraine, which had hired Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, as a consultant, despite Hunter Biden having absolutely zero experience in this at all, and got millions of dollars through this company that's owned by some of the most notorious oligarchs in the Ukraine. So Peter Schweitzer put together a book on this. If you're more interested in this topic, I highly recommend looking at his work on this subject. It's kind of a complicated story, but he connects all the dots in a way that's very succinct. There's a lot of evidence surrounding this. It's pretty rock solid from everything that I've seen. So that's really what was happening here. And in the past week, Joe Biden has denied all of this because it kind of got dredged up again. Joe Biden has denied that there was any quid pro quo, that he was basically withholding financial aid from the Ukrainian government in an attempt to persuade them to give this guy that was trying to investigate his son the axe, even though he was fired less than a week after Joe Biden visited. And that was, it's an incredible coincidence if nothing happened. And based on everything that I've seen, I don't see any reason to believe that it didn't happen, because the evidence surrounding it is just, it's not even circumstantial at this point. It's a really, really strong case that Schweitzer makes for all of this. And the media largely just completely ignored it. I think that Washington Post they did a story on it. And then I believe ABC News did a piece on it. But they only did one, and it didn't even really make the news cycle, and everybody else ignored it for that entire week. So that's really the long and short of what happened to it. That story just kind of died on the vine, and nobody really covered it, even though Schweitzer and several other respected journalists were begging them to look into it. So Joe Biden told Fox and Friends in an interview earlier this week, when he was asked about this, about whether or not he actually discussed Hunter's business dealings in the Ukraine with the Ukrainian government. And Joe Biden said, without qualification whatsoever, no, I never talked to them about that. Here's the problem with that. Turns out Hunter Biden, his son, said that he did. So this is a tweet from David Martocus. I have no idea how to pronounce that last name. Martosco, I guess is the way to say it. And this is, as the tweet says, this is from the New Yorker about 2 months ago. In December 2015, as Joe Biden prepared to return to Ukraine, his aides braced for a new scrutiny of Hunter's relationship with Burisma. That's the natural gas company I was telling you about. Amos Hutchinson, with the Obama administration's special envoy for energy policy, raised the matter with Biden, but did not go so far as to recommend that Hunter leave the board. As Hunter recalled, his father discussed Burisma with him just once. Dad said, "I hope you know what you're doing." I said that I do. So Joe Biden, caught in a lie again. He said he never discussed the business dealings with the Ukrainian government. He said that he never discussed the Ukraine with his son. Well, this is Joe Biden's son telling him that at least one time he did exactly that. It seems as though Joe Biden is lying yet again. So the news story that's come up is that there was a similar quid pro quo between Donald Trump trying to get the Ukrainian government to actually go through with this investigation and look into Joe Biden's history here. And he was offering essentially the same thing, except for dirt on Biden. Instead of saying, okay, I'm going to withhold foreign aid like Joe Biden did if you don't get rid of this guy that's looking into the business dealings with Burisma and my son. The allegation here is that Donald Trump said, all right, Ukraine, what I'm going to need you to do is look into Sleepy Joe and see what you can dig up on his son. And if you don't, we're going to have to withhold the foreign aid. That's what they're alleging happened. And if that happened, that's bad. That is the President of the United States using his power and using his authority as the president to persuade's not strong enough, manipulate a foreign government into doing his bidding for him. There's a good reason this is a dumb idea. First of all, the president has completely lawful ability to look into it himself. He is the head of, the president is, by definition, the top law enforcement official in the United States of America. He has the ability to go to the FBI or the CIA and to say, hey, would you guys mind looking into this? But why doesn't he just do that? If he wants to look into Joe Biden's past, if he wants to look into the business dealings, look, there's enough evidence to justify an investigation. Donald Trump is not he would not be outside of his power or be doing something immoral if he said to the FBI, hey guys, there's a lot of evidence here. Look into it. And I know my Trump impersonation is terrible, but I'm working on it. Anyway, Trump has the ability to do that. I don't understand why he's trying to get the help of a foreign government to dig up dirt on Joe Biden for him when he has the ability to do it. Now, if he's doing it specifically for political purposes, and he's only doing it because Joe Biden happens to be his political adversary, that's obviously not okay. But I don't understand why Trump can't say, look, there's significant evidence here and reason that we should look into it. Can we at least just, contemplate the idea of looking into it and see if there's enough evidence there and then try to move forward? There's nothing wrong with the President of the United States doing something like that, as long as he makes it clear that it's not politically motivated. So what they're alleging is going on here is that Trump is withholding this aid if they don't look into Biden. And the reason that this story really started gaining legs is that the FBI said it did not meet the standard to turn over to Congress. And they also said that they're not going to, announce who this whistleblower is or anything like that. And of course, that made everybody start freaking out. And they're saying, there is something here. There's some smoke. Therefore, there must be fire. Donald Trump must be hiding something. Now, the funny thing about this is what they are alleging that Donald Trump did is literally exactly the same thing that Joe Biden did, trying to manipulate a foreign government into doing what he wanted and using the power of his office to do so by threatening withholding financial aid. It's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same crime. And so I find this fascinating that the left has decided to make this their rallying cry, make this the thing that they're going to try to use to go after Trump again. And as I've said 100 times before, I think that they're like Charlie Brown in the football. Lucy keeps putting that football up in front of them, and they keep going to kick it no matter how many times she pulls the football away. I think the Democrats are going to find themselves in a similar situation that they did with Trump-Russia collusion, with the sexual assault allegations, with everything else, the Jeffrey Epstein, everything that they've tried to do to nail Trump, they've wound up flat on their back looking like an idiot. And I think that the same thing is probably going to happen here. I can't say that for sure, though. We don't have enough information to say that for sure. But Democrats immediately started calling for impeachment. As is expected, they've been calling for impeachment literally before the man even took office. And it turns out, when you look into this story, the original story that Washington Post broke about Donald Trump having this call with the Russian president and trying to get this arrangement going to where they start looking into Hunter Biden, and in exchange, Donald Trump expedites the financial aid and they still get their financial aid. So, in that same story, if you go all the way to the bottom, you see who the Washington Post source was. Not named, but they admit in their own story that the person that they are using to get all this information didn't actually hear the call or see the transcript of the call. This is just something that they heard about in the hallway. Basically, what has happened is they have taken a workplace rumor and made an entire national news story out of it, and have done so for the past 4 or 5 days. And what's amazing is, it's not like this is a new revelation. It's not like it was with Brett Kavanaugh, for example, where the story went out, and even though there were obvious flaws in it, that a couple days later, the New York Times comes out and admits, yeah, well, the victim doesn't even remember that this actually happened, so kind of blows a big hole in the idea that this is true. It's not even like that. This is in the original story, and they don't care. Workplace rumor or not, doesn't matter to them. As long as it can be used to hurt Donald Trump, they don't care whether it's true or not. They don't want to wait for the facts. They don't wait to see if there's anything to this. Anything that they believe can hurt Donald Trump, they will rush to be wrong. and have done so consistently time and time again. So, speaking of all of this, Trump has actually already announced, and this is the breaking news here, because this is only a few hours old. Trump has announced that he is going to make the full transcript available. So that call between him and the Ukrainian president, we're going to have the whole thing. The whole thing. And that's why I don't want to do too much in speculation here, because we don't have it yet. But according to a tweet by Donald Trump, we're going to have the entirety of it. Not, redacted, not have all the best parts taken out. We're going to get the full transcript, and I intend to read that and cover it. So, why did he wait? Why not just put out the transcript right away and put the nail in the coffin on this one and call it a day? I think there's two possible reasons. First, and I think there's at least an ounce of truth to this one, I think that even if the second is true, that the first is also applicable here. This is the president conversing with a foreign leader in a private manner. If that is going to be disclosed, the intelligence community needs time to look over it to make sure nothing is being discussed that is confidential. And according to Trump's tweet, he specifically said that it was unconfidential, and because of that, we're going to get the full unredacted transcript there, which is great. And that means that there was nothing that the FBI or the other intelligence community saw as confidential, and so they're going to be able to release the whole thing. If Donald Trump is saying that, that means that somebody checked. So what probably happened is he had his intelligence guys going through it and looking and making sure that everything was on the up and up and it was okay to release it, and now they're going to do so. That takes a little time, and that's probably why Donald Trump had to wait at least for some of the time. But I think that this may be the more accurate case, and I typically try not to give Trump too much credit for things. By that, I don't mean I try to be harsh on him for no reason. But I think some people, they try to over-romanticize Trump and think that he's playing 8-dimensional upside-down chess. I don't usually think that Trump thinks that much about what he's going to do. He's a very impulsive man. Maybe he thought this through. Because if not, it's just an incredibly fortunate coincidence for him. I think what's going on here is that at least part of the consideration for waiting this long to put it out, and frankly, relatively, it's not that long. I honestly think strategically he should hold off for a few more days on putting this thing out there. The longer he waits to put the transcript out, the dumber the Democrats look. You remember the whole birther thing with President Obama? The reason that Obama was in no rush to put that birth certificate out is because he held the Trump card. If you've got a royal flush in your hand, you're not in a hurry to put that down, because you know that what you have beats whatever anybody else has. You don't have to get it out there. And I know that it doesn't matter how fast you throw your cards in. I'm just using it as an analogy. And so with President Obama, all he had to do was sit back and smile and wait for people to say that he wasn't really born in the United States and all this other stuff, which thankfully I was not taken in by that bait. I was not one of the ones that tried to make it a significant point that Obama was not born in the United States. I believed him when he said he was born in Hawaii. All he had to do was sit back, wait for people who opposed him to make a fool of themselves, and then go, yep, here's the birth certificate. I'm from Hawaii. That's where I'm from. That's all he had to do. I think that Donald Trump should wait at least a few more days before releasing this transcript. Because if he's really holding the Trump card, pun intended, all he has to do is throw that transcript out there to the media, show that there's nothing in there, nothing between him and the Ukrainian president that suggests that he would want a deal between them. Because even if he asked them to look into the stuff with Hunter Biden, it's still not a crime. It's still not anything. He's still not abusing the power of his office to ask a foreign leader to do something if he's not offering anything in return. And I don't believe that he is. And so all Trump has to do is sit back, watch the chaos ensue, and then after the Democrats have made complete and utter fools of themselves again trying to get him impeached, he just throws the transcript out there and says, see, there's nothing to it. That's what Trump should be doing. And I think that he probably is at least taking that into consideration. Nancy Pelosi has even announced that she is going to bring up an impeachment inquiry. They aren't drawing up articles of impeachment yet, but they're at least considering it. This was Nancy Pelosi earlier. The actions of the Trump presidency revealed the dishonorable fact of the president's betrayal of his oath of office. Oh gosh. Betrayal of our national security and betrayal of the integrity of our elections. Therefore, today I am announcing the House of Representatives is moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry. Boy, Nancy Pelosi really wants Trump to get a second term. Because if you're looking at history, and this isn't even distant history, this is recent history, nothing helped Bill Clinton and his approval numbers more than the Republicans trying to impeach him. And I think that you're going to see a very similar effect right here. Pelosi must really want a second Trump presidency because this is playing right into his hands. And like I said, all he's doing, if he actually is innocent, and there actually is no quid pro quo in that transcript, she is going to look really dumb when he puts it out there. And so are all the other Democrats that have been calling for his impeachment. And what's amazing about this is especially true if Joe Biden is the nominee. This is not something that that Vice President Biden is going to be able to use against Donald Trump. And here's why. It's the same reason that whenever Hillary Clinton tried to attack the fact that Donald Trump is a sleaze when it comes to women, and he is, that was not an effective attack. Why? Because she is a person that has literally hired private investigators and tried to silence women when it came to sexual harassment allegations against her husband, including one rape allegation. And because of that, she was the wrong person to say to Donald Trump that he was a sleazebag for the way he treated women. She had no credibility in that realm. And because of this, if Joe Biden tries this line of attack, if he tries to say, well, you were engaged in this quid pro quo with the president of the Ukraine, even if that turns out to be true, that is an attack that is not going to land him any points because all he has to say is, well, yeah, Joe, but so were you. And I did it because I wanted to get to justice. I wanted to do it because I wanted to find out what you were doing in Ukraine. You were doing it to enrich yourself and your family. You were doing it to make that cheddar. See, Joe Biden is not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole if he's smart. And because of that, that significantly weakens the strongest candidate in the Democrat primary against Donald Trump right now. This thing is being painted as though it's a disaster for Donald Trump. And if there's the quid pro quo, it's probably going to get him into trouble. But even if it's true, this is a dream come true for Donald Trump. Because even if he did something wrong, and if he did, he should face some kind of reprimand for it. I'm not saying that it's quite impeachment level, or at least I wouldn't consider it quite there. But I mean, Donald Trump should face the music if that was to take place. You can't just abuse the office of the presidency like that, and I'll be critical of him all day on that. But even if it happens to turn out to be true, if Joe Biden is the nominee, it won't matter. Because Trump will be immune to that particular attack. Now, if it's a Warren or a Harris or a Bernie or something like that, yeah, okay, I can see that as being a legitimate attack and something that may actually wind up hurting Donald Trump in the election in the long run. That could happen. But it ain't going to happen if it's Joe Biden. And I hope the Democrats are not watching this because this is a strategy meeting for the Democrats for sure. But just to kind of sum up, here are some of the possible outcomes, and then we'll move on to the Daily Dose of Stupid. First of all, one possible outcome is it happens to be true and it hurts Trump significantly. I think if he's running against Elizabeth Warren, I think he still winds up beating Elizabeth Warren. But if he's running against a Kamala Harris, Okay, that might be a little bit more trouble. If he's running against a Bernie Sanders, I still don't think that Bernie Sanders could beat him, but this becomes a significant problem, a significant scandal in Donald Trump's presidency if that's the case. And so it could be true and wind up hurting Trump significantly. It also could be true and does nothing because torpedoing Trump also hits Joe Biden. So, in other words, the media kind of backs off because they don't want the candidate that is very likely to be the only one that can beat Donald Trump. They wind up letting it die because they know if they go after Trump, they can't go after Trump without also hitting Biden sort of in the vicinity. In other words, you can hit Trump with the bomb, but the explosion is also going to hit Joe Biden pretty hard. And so, even if it happens to be true, it winds up significantly hurting Joe Biden. The media could also run interference for Biden and try to make it to where this hurts Trump, but not Biden. I don't think the media will be able to pull that off. It's a possibility. I mean, they're very good at this and have been for a long time. I mean, for example, you could make a much more compelling case that the Clinton administration actually colluded with the Russians than you could the Trump administration, but that's not usually what people associate the Clinton candidacy with. And when I said Clinton administration, I'm sorry, I misspoke there. The Clinton campaign. I should have used campaign there because, to my knowledge, there was no collusion between Bill Clinton's administration and Russia. But anyway, so that's a possible outcome. Now, this, I think, is also a likely outcome because of the way that the media is reacting right now. I think there's a possibility that the media says, screw it, let's use this to go after Trump and we'll figure out something else. Because the truth is, I don't think that the media wants Joe Biden. Based on the way that they're covering him, based on the way they're constantly covering his gaffes, and the way that they're running interference for Elizabeth Warren, I think the media wants Elizabeth Warren. I could be wrong on that. But the weird thing is, I think the media even thinks that Joe Biden, he's too moderate. I know that scares people, and it should, because if all of a sudden Joe Biden's a moderate, then we've got much bigger problems. But I think the media really wants Warren. And because of that, that's the reason that you're seeing this boost in the polls. That's the reason you're getting so much favorable coverage for her. And so I think it's very possible that the media says, let's hit Trump with this. And if Biden goes away in the aftermath, oh, well, we don't really like him anyway. That's a very, very likely outcome. And then you could have a combination of that and this. And I think that this one's also very likely because based on everything I've seen, I think the story's probably fake, and we'll find out when the transcripts come out. I think that it's also possible that this thing is a huge fake, and it goes nowhere, just like Russian collusion. I think that you could very likely see that. That it turns out that it's a big dud, and then people just ignore it, and by the time that the election actually rolls around, people have long since forgotten that. And I think that you're going to have a combination possibly of those last two. And it might be interesting that the media could use this as a way to get at Trump. It could possibly wind up not hurting Trump at all. And because Joe Biden is sort of caught in the ensuing explosion, that it winds up torpedoing Biden and hurting him far more than it does Trump. Just because Trump has a lot longer to go between his election than Joe Biden does in the Iowa caucus. And I don't think that the media would see it as any big loss to lose Joe Biden and have somebody like Sanders or Warren at the top of the ticket instead. So if I were advising Donald Trump on this, my advice to him would be, your message needs to be, look, I'm just doing my job, and these nutcases are constantly trying to stymie me for no reason at every single turn. That the Democrats are just making crap up as they go along, making up false allegations, just like they did with the Russian scandal. And if he has that transcript and it shows exactly what Trump claims it does, well, then he's home free. And I would stay on that message for weeks if I had to. Because that's going to be something that drives him home. It's going to drive his approval ratings up. Now, whether or not Trump can actually stay on message, that remains to be seen. But the point is, that would be the one that I go to. All right, so got a little bit of time left. Let's go ahead and go to the Daily Dose of Stupid.
That was stupid.
I know it was stupid.
Really stupid.
Hey, I just said it was stupid.
And today's Daily Dose of Stupid, I want to make very clear here. I am doing the Daily Dose of Stupid, and it is featuring a clip of this person. But I am not suggesting that the person herself is stupid, and I'm talking about Greta Snaps, the 16-year-old girl who was speaking recently to the UN. Now, what she's saying is incorrect, but I'm not calling her directly stupid, and I'll explain why here in a little bit. So here's the clip of her speaking to the UN. This is Greta Snaps. Any second now. Come on, video.
My message is that we'll be watching you.
Awkward clap.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here.
I agree.
I should be back in school
I
on
agree.
the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe. The popular idea of cutting our emissions in half in 10 years only gives us a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees and the risk of setting off irreversible chain reactions beyond human control. How dare you pretend that this can be solved with just business as usual and some technical solutions? There will not be any solutions or plans presented in line with these figures here today, because these numbers are too uncomfortable and you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you. We will not let you get away with this. Right here, right now, is where we draw the line. The world is waking up, and change is coming whether you like it or not.
All right, so first thing you need to know about Greta, her father is a director and her mother is an actress in the opera. Now, granted, you would think that she would be a little bit better at acting considering that background, but, you know, you have to, children actors, you know how it is. But here's something that I find even more frightening. I think that she was obviously overacting there, and it's an over-dramatization for sure. However, I don't believe that the sentiment underlying that is completely false. In other words, what I'm saying here is, I think that she is laying it on thick, but I think she really does believe what she's saying. I don't think that that's insincere. And I think that she really does have a emotional reaction to the things that she's saying. She's just laying it on thick for the cameras. But the underlying sentiment from her is actually correct. But she is a puppet in this sense. A willing puppet, but a puppet nonetheless. She does believe these things, but she's essentially acting at the behest of adults that are telling her what to say and think and feel. That seems to be what is going on in this particular clip. And she's putting on the show essentially that her parents want her to. And I hate that for her, but she is being used as a pawn. She's essentially a mascot. And because of that, I think that we need to be cautious in the way that we approach our response to this. And that's the reason why I said she's not actually the source of the stupid. Stupid is being put on display there for sure, but it's not coming from her. It's coming from the adults surrounding her. It's coming from her parents. It's coming from those on the left that are using her. And it's coming from the adults sitting around the table taking her seriously. She's a child. And just because her ideas are incorrect and the things that she's saying are way off base, I think that actually the people that are being stupid, the ones that we should actually focus and zero in on, are the people that should be the mature adults in the room that are sitting there and taking her seriously. That's the really stupid part of all of this. And I do believe, genuinely, that this thing borders on child abuse. They're putting this little girl up in front of everybody, and it is irresponsible to do this. First of all, I don't think that it's a good idea to give somebody that fame and notoriety, especially in an arena that is as toxic as politics. Now, I'm not saying that she should be silenced. I'm not saying that anybody should intervene. I still believe in free speech. But I'm saying, as a parent, I believe it to be irresponsible for them to have their daughter do this and to prop her up this way. And it's irresponsible for the other liberals, the other people that are doing this and taking her seriously and putting her in the limelight like this. I don't think it's a responsible thing to do. But when all of that is really said and done, I think that it's actually far more harmful and far more abusive, the beliefs that they are filling this girl's head with. It is irresponsible to constantly bombard a child with the idea that the world is going to end and they're going to die very soon, and that there's a large contingency of evil people that are just doing this because they're selfish and want her to die. And that seems to be what she believes based on her reaction to all of this. When I was a kid, I was terrified that zombies or vampires, either one, I went through phases, but at one point I was really scared of vampires and later I was scared of zombies. But the point is, there was a time where I was very scared of these things. I was a little kid, and when you're a little kid and you watch things on TV, it kind of blurs the line between reality and fiction because you're a child and you don't always understand the difference. The best thing that the adults in my life did for me at that point, the best thing that they did for me, was to dismiss these fears as ridiculous. Doesn't mean they treated my fear as though it was insincere. They showed empathy for me being afraid, and they heard me out and listened to my fears. But ultimately, my parents dismissed these things as foolish because those things don't exist. And they should have. The fact that they dismissed it as ridiculous helped me grow out of it. This is a child that has had her fears confirmed and that these boogeymen lurking just under her bed are real, and her parents are telling them that they are real. This boogeyman of this apocalyptic, as she put it, mass extinction event. Her parents have reinforced that and scared this child to death. That is child abuse. That is psychological child abuse. And our parents should be ashamed of themselves for allowing that to continue, especially based off of something that isn't real. Can you imagine, for example, if this were a religious kid and her parents had been bombarding her entire life with the idea that she is going to go to hell? This was the kid of a fire and brimstone preacher that went to one of those congregations that's constantly all they talk about is people going to hell, and if you essentially step one toe out of line, God's just basically standing there waiting to thump people. And that's the kind of God that, believe me, I've seen sermons like this in certain churches, that they have people so scared that they're really trying to scare people into obeying the gospel. Can you imagine how the media would react if it were a kid like this going up in front of people, being given a platform, telling everybody that they're going to go to hell, and they're scared to death of this because of what their parents have taught them. There would be people on the left saying that that is child abuse, and they would be right, by the way. So, really, I think that you put on display a real double standard when you point that out. But if I could give my advice to people, don't take the bait. To my fellow conservatives, my friends, my brethren, people on the right, don't take the bait. If you want to talk about the stupidity of the people surrounding her, okay. I think that that's an acceptable message. Don't counteract her directly. It's unwise. And the reason that it is unwise is because she's a kid. She is not mature enough to handle this fight. She obviously doesn't have the emotional stability or maturity for it. And that's not necessarily her fault. She's 16. She's a teenage girl. They make everything dramatic. I mean, yes, she's literally talking about an end of a world, but to a girl, not getting the right prom dress is the end of the world in a lot of situations. I'm not saying that there aren't 16-year-olds that aren't more mature and more stable, but I'm just saying, on average, let's be honest, teenage girls are a very dramatic creature, by and large. And she is kind of blowing things out of proportion, just like most teenage girls do, and so that should be taken into consideration. But if you go dunking on a kid, I mean, yes, I could rhetorically destroy her points. They're ridiculous. Not going to do that. And the reason I'm not going to do that is because the correct way to respond to this is that she's a child. And rhetorically destroying a child shouldn't score you any brownie points. It makes you look like a bully. You ever seen that Seinfeld episode where Kramer is talking about how well he's doing in karate and gives advice to Elaine, and then Elaine goes by and checks out his karate school and finds out he's the only adult in the class? That he's been essentially beating up a bunch of kids, and that's where all his confidence comes from. That's the same thing here. It's not a good look for somebody to rhetorically destroy a little kid. And because of that, even if you win the debate, which granted isn't hard to do based on the things that she's saying, then all you do is you look like you're picking on little kids. That's it. It's not a wise thing to do. And that's why I say that we ought to refrain from this. You see, the left is making the mistake of taking her seriously. The left is making the mistake of treating her as though she is an adult and the things that she is saying are relevant. Let's not make the same mistake. Let's not engage. The only way to win this game is to step back on this one. There are plenty of stupid adults that we can go after on this issue that are saying boneheaded things. I mean, you look at the 7-hour climate debate, that thing was a freaking cornucopia of stupid. And those are people that are actually running for president that might have some real influence on this issue in the future, many of them senators, that kind of thing. That's the people you go after. You don't have a fight with a kid. Because even if you win, you just look like you overpowered them. I mean, it'd be like you don't do that, because then you're just bullying the little kid. And as any good parent will tell you, when a kid is throwing a temper tantrum, the best thing that you can do for them is to ignore them. That's what's going on here. She's a little girl, very upset, having a temper tantrum. Let's leave her alone, let it play itself out. And once she sees that people aren't actually reacting to it, she'll learn. Just like little kids do. That's the way that this ought to be handled. Now, I want to explain just a fine point here. There is a difference in debating somebody like this and debating, for example, AOC, who says essentially the same boneheaded things over and over again. AOC is essentially a dramatic teenage girl, but she is an actual member of Congress, and she is actually 30 years old. She may not act like she's 30, but she is. I think she's had her 30th birthday now. She was 29 when she entered office. She may be 30 at this point. I don't know. Either way, she's clearly over the age of 18. And she also does hold a legitimate position of power in the United States Congress. There's a world of difference in showing how dumb she is and showing how dumb a little kid is. She's a child and she deserves to be treated like a child, which means that we give her a little extra grace. And it also means that we don't take her too seriously. Now, granted, I've stopped doing, you may have noticed, as many segments on AOC, frankly, because it's just becoming repetitive and too easy for me. I mean, it was always easy to debunk her arguments, but now her arguments are getting repetitive, and so if I do another segment, it'll look exactly like a segment that I already did about AOC, and so I've kind of backed off on that. But there is a similarity. In both cases, there is no substance. In both cases, it's all feelings and raw emotion, a raw reaction to the information that they've been given. I mean, this girl, even earlier in this same climate summit, I believe it was the same venue where she said, I don't want you to listen to me. I want you to listen to the scientists. She doesn't even know her own material. She doesn't even know her own facts and statistics. This isn't something that she studied. She is merely a mascot, a puppet being used by the left. And the best analogy that I heard all day, and I've heard several different people talk about this, and when I do hear something that I think is profound and I want to recycle it, I always give credit where credit is due. This one goes out to Steve Dace on the Blaze Radio Network. Steve Dace gave a phenomenal analysis of this today. And one of the things that he brought up that I thought just hit home said, if you're on the football team and the mascot comes up to you and starts making fun of you, is it the right thing for the player to do to punch out the mascot? No, and he's absolutely right there. You go out on the field and you do what you're supposed to do. You ignore the mascot, you ignore the crazy fans, you ignore them. You go after the people who you're actually supposed to be competing against. And that's the way to win this argument. You see, the Bible tells us that we're supposed to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. This is one of those scenarios where I think both actually apply. We need to be wise to not merely engage, just like, we should have done in large part with the Parkland kids. Not taken them seriously, not treated them as though they were an actual viable source of information. The best thing to do in that case would have been to not engage in a lot of ways. But also to be as harmless as doves. To show, look, we're not out for blood. We don't want to embarrass kids. We'll have this discussion with somebody that actually has some expertise on the matter and leave it at that. This is a case that the Bible's advice to be wise as serpents, as harmless as doves really applies. Speaking of God's word, let's go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
Chaplain's Report today, we're going to be looking into the book of James, but I want to give a little setup first. And this actually pertains to the show itself. A few days ago, I put out an individual video because if you haven't checked out my channel on YouTube, Tactics Radio, I have the full episodes like you're seeing right now, and then I also have smaller individual segments. I have the chaplain's reports, I'll have some of the daily doses of stupid, I just kind of pick and choose which ones I think are the best, and I may take a segment from the regular part of the show and bring that out every now and then. Usually do about 2 a day. Anyway, I did this particular segment on a new red flag law that was being put up in the state of Alabama. And I could quickly tell by the comments that it was getting that the vast majority of the people that were commenting on this had not actually watched the video or researched the topic in which I was discussing. Now, I've seen this countless times with people on the left, and a few times before this with people on the right. But usually it's far more obvious with people on the left that they haven't actually watched the video. They're commenting on the video, but they're commenting based on the headline. They haven't actually watched the video. And then I had a lot of my friends and people that I like and respect. I mean no harm towards them, but they were talking on a video and commenting on a video, chomping at the bit to comment on it, despite the fact that they hadn't actually watched it. And when questioning them about this, they said, "Oh, I don't have to watch it. I don't have to watch it to comment on it." It just amazes me that there are people that are wanting to comment on a video they haven't seen. It'd be like giving a book report on a book you never read. Well, I've heard about The Christmas Carol, and I've seen some of the movie adaptations, so I can write a book on it. And in this case, they hadn't even seen the movie versions or any of that. They were just commenting on an issue which they really had no knowledge of. And I think that it's so easy to fall into that trap. We live in an outrage culture where we see something that we don't like and we immediately start rattling our mouth off, even if we don't know the actual content behind the headline, if we haven't actually researched it. And one of the comments really stuck with me, which I don't entirely disagree with, but I think that it was being misapplied. That there are certain eternal truths, and I don't have to, essentially the guy said that I don't have to really question those. And I couldn't disagree more. There are certainly eternal truths, things that are always true, have always been true, and are always going to be true. But those are the things that we need to question the most. As Thomas Jefferson once said, question with boldness even the very existence of God. For if there be a God, surely he prefers honest questioning to blindfolded fear. You'll rarely find people that have a stronger belief in the existence of God than me. And yet, I believe that this is something worth questioning. And that's an eternal principle. That's an eternal truth. Of course it is. And I believe that goes across the spectrum. But it reminded me of something else, and it actually reminded me of this scripture in James 1:19-20. This you know, my beloved brethren, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. A couple things I wanted you to notice about this verse. First of all, James is talking to Christians. This is the Lord, through inspiration, talking to his people. Why would he tell a group of people whose mission in life is to spread the word about God and spread the gospel? Why would he tell them to be slow to speak and quick to listen? That seems to not make any sense. Why wouldn't God want us to be very quick to speak and to tell people about Jesus? Because he understands that in order to get our message across correctly, we have to listen. There are eternal truths. There are things that are true and are always going to be true. That does not give us a right to ignore other arguments and other ideas. That does not give us an excuse to not listen to what other people have to say. If you look at the biblical example, all through the conversion stories of Christ, if you're looking through the conversion stories in Acts, you'll notice a similar theme. They listened to what other people were saying. Paul, when he was in Athens, quoted their own philosophers and poets when he was preaching to them. Stephen was using the Old Testament when he was teaching to a group of Jewish elders. Jesus listened to the religious ideas and the life story of people when he was talking to them, be it the woman at the well or other people that he ran into that he converted. It always started with listening. You see, as Christians, I think to really be fulfilling the mission that God gave us, we have to not only be willing to listen, We have to look forward to it. We have to covet hearing other people and then respond and have our speech be seasoned with salt and inform them about the love of Jesus Christ. See, we don't need to be quick to speak. We need to want to get that information, to gain that knowledge, to understand the people that we're talking to before we start talking to them. That's the way to win souls. And on another level, it made me think about the way that we view free speech. And for those of you that have been watching this program for any amount of time, you know that I'm a big proponent of free speech. I mean, it's literally my career, speaking to people about my ideas. So I have a very strong vested interest in free speech, and I'm a free speech absolutionist. Free speech is all kinds of speech, even if I don't like it, even if I disagree with it, even if I think it's dangerous. As long as you're not actually calling for violence of somebody, free speech is still protected. No exceptions. But here's the thing. As concerned as I am about what universities and governments and big corporations like the big tech companies are doing to free speech, and that is a legitimate area of concern for me. I've spent a lot of time talking about it. I wonder if sometimes we get so worried about that we forget the most important part of free speech is listening. Because it doesn't matter how good the exchange of ideas are, it doesn't matter how much diversity of thought that we have if we are unwilling to listen to new ideas. If we close ourselves off and say, nope, don't want to hear it. I want to rattle off about my free speech, but I don't want to hear any ideas that might be different than mine or don't confirm what I already believe. It doesn't matter if we have absolute free speech. It doesn't matter if we win the fight for free speech against the universities, against the governments, against the big tech companies. Even if we have absolute free speech and have plenty of platforms to put it out there, it doesn't matter a bit if we are unwilling to listen to one another. And if that is true, we can have free speech all that we want, it's not going to benefit us. A marketplace of ideas only works if there are people that are willing to be swayed by them. I mean, we call it a marketplace of ideas because that's what we're doing. We're exchanging. What's the good of having a marketplace if nobody's buying anything? It's great to have the venue. It's great to have the storefront. If you're not having anybody buying anything or anybody selling anything, doesn't do you a lick of good. And so for that exchange to take place, we need to follow the advice of the Bible. We have to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Stay the course, friends.
Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright